On a related note, you should consider how you are splitting your UV islands apart and use this strategically to help alleviate normal map rendering problems. It may be difficult to see the relationship between UV splits and normal maps at first, so let's take a look at a few examples here. My goal here is to bake this high poly shape and make a normal map that can work with a low poly shape such as this, which is just two faces. But the difference between these four is that I am either hardening the normals or I am keeping the UVs welded together or splitting them apart, welded like this or split apart like this. Just trying different combinations to see which one produces the best results. And the only thing on this high res shape, the only thing I've done is just beveled the corner here, and I want that to show up on all of these. So if we turn on the normal map here, you can see what shows up here. With the UVs welded and with the normals hardened, you get an artifact on the edge here. And you can see what that looks like on this image right here. This is what it's looking like in that corner versus something like this where the UVs are welded and it's soft. This is what it looks like. You could see the difference here. On the softened normals, you get a cleaner transition. And here there's a more harsh transition. These colors are contrasting quite a bit at that transition. So intuitively you would think that, oh, it's okay, so this is the right solution here. It's a cleaner transition and it shows up better. It looks better here. But this can be a little bit deceiving, and we'll get back to why that is in a little bit. On this side, both of these look good with the split UVs, with both hardened normals and softened normals. They both look good. It gets a little bit more complicated though than this. Let's turn on the next group here, which is a cube. And so the reason why this one is kind of misleading is if you look at this one here now, it's using the same strategy with keeping the UVs welded and with soft normals. But if you take a look at the way it's rendering, because it's soft on all the sides, the colors are getting mixed and stressed quite a bit. And although the corners generally look pretty good, I mean, it's showing up with a little bit of artifacts on here, on some of them, but the corners look pretty decent. So these transitions are working, but the problem is all of this extreme color mixing in the center of these squares. You can see from distance here, you can see compared to like up here, this plane looks really clean, but then here, I don't know if this shows up on your screen as much as it does on mine, but you can see that there are some little shading errors or artifacts in. I don't even know if I call it artifacts because that's exactly what's intended right now. You can see that the plane doesn't look as clean as it does up here, and that's not a huge deal a lot of times, especially if you had more geometry in here. It could help alleviate some of this. But let's compare that to some of these other solutions. Um, just for example, going back to this very first example that we had problems with on this edge, the same thing happens here. But with the normals hardened again, you can see that the flaws that were happening on the faces, it's not present here. It's just all on the edges instead. So if you split your UVs and with soft normals, your, let's see, it'll look like this. And this time the corners are really clean, but again, you still have this discoloration in the center of your faces. That can cause some dirtiness to the surface. And in this particular example, the best case would be to split your UVs and harden the normals. And what that would look like is like this. So, you know, the face is pretty clean. It's just that flat color, just because there's nothing going on there, which is helping it keep the surface clean. But also the edges are very clean as well. Of course, most of the time, you'll be building far more complex shapes than just a cube. The approach I take is to first decide where I want to split the UVs. And I especially consider splitting the UVs where there's a significant angle change to the surface, such as, you know, the perpendicular corner here, or even like a spiky angle. You know, I usually will consider splitting the UVs there. And in a way, the low poly normals and the UVs, they go hand in hand with baking normal maps. If you split the UVs, then you can harden the normals as well, and it'll look the same as if you had kept them soft. That's why these two examples look the same here, even though the normal maps themselves look vastly different. This is with the hard normals here. This is the way it baked. And this is with the soft. This is how it baked. So, you know, if the way it looks here doesn't really matter as far as the game engine is concerned, then, you know, the conclusion that you might come to is, hey, I can just harden the edges anywhere that I have split the UVs. And this is true in a way. As far as the game engine is concerned, it would look absolutely fine, which is why, you know, these two do look fine. And, you know, there are scripts available that can take all of your UV border edges on your model and harden them for you. And, you know, I actually have it right here. And, you know, it's very useful and I use it all the time, but it's not something that I would recommend in every situation. And let's take a look at this, for example. In this, for this cylindrical shape, I have the way I've laid out the UVs on it. Since this is kind of a significant angle change, I've cut off the top and the bottom, and also I've mirrored this. So I've offset the UVs on half of this shape, and I'll talk more about offsetting UVs and things like that a little bit later. But for now, this is how I want my low poly mesh to be. If I were to run the script, you can see that because this is technically a border edge, a UV border edge, it hardened the normals here. And in this case, I don't want that to happen because, well, first of all, it if this model were to be rendered without normal maps for for whatever reason, maybe it's a low spec machine and the user turned off the normal maps, or something to that effect. They'd be looking at a model that looks like this, and especially if this was like a character and a body and there's a seam running down the center, it could look pretty bad. But other than that, if you were, I mean, I don't have a normal map baked this right now, but if I did bake the normal map on this, you'd actually get more discoloration, not discoloration. You'd get more of a change in the color of the normal map at these edges, kind of like here, where the color is bleeding into the shape of the face a lot more. And generally speaking, I try to avoid these kinds of cases. I mean, that's why we split the V border edges, which so that you get a little bit less of that going on. So it's kind of interesting that you're splitting it here to get less color bleeding, but then in this case you want to keep it soft to have less color bleeding, and that's just because of the angle difference of the surface. Here it's harsher, so the normal has to work more, and then here it's not a big angle change, so the normal actually doesn't have to do anything drastic unless you harden the normals, because then it's actually going to bleed the color in order to compensate for that hard edge. I know that maybe it doesn't make sense right now, but if you try it out for yourself, I think it'll become clear why that is. The last thing I want to talk about is the topic of selectively hardening normals for artistic reasons. You can see in this example here that I have two models, and both are exactly the same. The only difference is that I've selectively hardened some normals on the right model here. I think it's certainly the better looking model of the two if you were only judging it without normal maps. You can see that it cleaned up some of the shading artifacts and disguises the low polygon nature of the model by suggesting more clarity and definition to the shapes. And I could have actually done more than this if the model was built with this technique in mind. But for normal map models, you should only be hardening the normals to help you get better normal map bakes, and not to make the low polygon model look better. As we discussed before, the normals of your low poly model have a big impact on how your normal maps will render. So selectively hardening the normals not only introduces needless complication to your normal map bakes, but it can also be problematic if your low poly model lost these custom normals. Let's say that another artist works on your model to fix a bug or to add something, and maybe they just softened everything, or they exported it, and when you import it, and maybe it lost the normals that way. Whatever happens, it can be difficult after that is lost to try to get it back, because the normal map will look bad in those areas because the normals on the low poly model have changed. And even as the original artist, you might not remember exactly how you had hardened, which edges you had hardened to get this particular look that works with the normal map bake. Your normal map should provide you with better results than this anyway. If you had a good high poly model that you rendered from, it should look way better than this. So just keep in mind the differences between low polygon models built for diffuse only technology versus normal maps, and pick what's right for what you're trying to accomplish.